quite a few videos on this channel about how toy assortments work from my experience doing this for the last 25 years, and there's a lot of details that go into an assortment of toys. Everything from tooling to silhouettes to just having variety on shelf and ensuring that main characters and variants of main characters are always available, as well as your obligatory C-list, D-list, and other villains. But for the most part, an assortment is meant to be equal. Every character in that is more or less providing the same amount of value, just different colors, different characters. Every once in a while, though, a basic figure comes out not so basic and tends to tower over other figures in that assortment. Now, to address this, I want to make sure we're clear. We're talking about basic figure assortments, the kind of bottom price point, not the shut-me-up price point, but your entry-level price point is what the industry calls it, where you're getting a figure, usually, and an accessory. Not talking about build-ups, where you take a basic figure, then add a whole bunch of extra accessories to add value. I mean, that's a completely different SKU. And I'm also not talking about deluxe assortments, which are meant to be a buy-up, providing a character and a specifically larger accessory or action feature. And I know I'm using all these Green Lantern toys, but they're a good example because the Battle Shifters deluxe figures were clearly more value than the basic figures that just came with a sword or a punch hand. All right. And we're also not talking about when we're trying to deliberately plus up the value of a smaller basic figure, like the infamous Jawa with cloth cape. This was done because the Jawa was noticeably smaller than every other figure, even R2, and without that cloth cape, he just didn't have the perceived value that you got from a larger figure like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Darth Vader. So the figure on the right there, the original vinyl cape, was replaced by a cloth cape to provide just more value for what was a very small figure. All right, so with that as background, let's jump in. So the first example is this guy, Ares, or Ares, God of War, Mars, whatever you want to call him. So he's not only noticeably larger than basic figures, he's almost as big as a Build-A-Figure or a Collect and Connect trademark and copyright. So yeah, when you compare Ares to a standard 6-inch figure, and yes, I know Daredevil is Marvel and he's DC, but we can all love each other. Yeah, you can see he's bigger. Why is this? Well, this one was because of a licensor, because Warner Brothers, who owns DC, as well as a lot of other awesome IP, this was the first year Mattel was working with them on the full DC universe, and they wanted Mattel to prove what they could do, sort of the limits, and it was a direct request. All right, other ways that deluxe, or rather more larger basic figures wind up is the G.I. Joe Snake Eyes syndrome, where Snake Eyes lost all of his deco so that it could be used on other figures in the assortment. By making him deco-less, the paint apps could be re-proportioned. McFarlane Toys did the same thing with their Malbolgia figure. You'll notice he's an infinitely used example of this, or notorious, I guess I should say. All of the other figures in the assortment they were definitely much smaller than Malbolgia. I mean, they were larger than your standard figures, which is what McFarlane was kind of all about, and deco and accessories were not left wanting. So how did they afford Malbolgia? Well, similar to the G.I. Joe method of taking all of the deco and removing it from one figure in the assortment, McFarlane put out a large series of figures with no deco or simple head swaps, like the hamburger head Spawn there, and then the gold Spawn. And this was done, a lot. And by doing figures over and over again with either no deco or clear deco, different iterations like that, that more or less paved the way in the P&L to put more deco and more plastic into making Malbolgia bigger in the basic assortment. So the non-deco figures, just like Snake Eyes, help pay for the larger one, or the more decoed figures. Looking over at Star Wars, that's an interesting category because most of the figures tend to be, human scale. I mean, you've got your Jawas, of course, but for the most part, everybody's about 6 feet tall. And when you want to have a collection of a specific moment, and let's take Jabba's Palace, because it's a great one, because there's so many characters on screen at that time, well, you want to be able to have things accurate, especially for the characters that are larger. Like on the right there, you can see there's quite a few figures, Effin Mon, Hermie Oodle, that, kind of break the scale or a size mold. So how in the world did this guy, Effin Mon, a figure so big you could take the smallest figure in the line, Yoda, and put him in his mouth, which is articulated. And, how did he wind up on a basic card? Well, basically, no pun intended, he won the Fans' Choice poll. And unlike all of the other Fans' Choice winners, he was a lot more plastic. I mean, kind of fudged it with Amenemom there with his giant staff and the skeleton bones. But yeah, all of the other winners of the previous fan poll and even later fan polls were just basic figures with standard deco, standard accessories. Effin Mon, not quite so much. And he wound up being produced as a basic figure because he won, and Hasbro marketing managers later said that this figure broke their back. They lost it. They lost their shirt, I think was the phrase. That's what it was. So so collectors could have their Effin Mon, but Hasbro's like, oh my god, we're never doing that again. And of course, then they did do that again with a few other figures, but this time the offset cost was done in a more holistic way. So characters like Hermie Oodle or Yoda with Kaibuck, or my personal favorite for as far as a basic figure with the largest deluxe accessory is Han Solo with torture rack. Yes, they make action figures with torture racks. Yeah, you'll never see that again. So this figure came with an accessory that you're telling me this was a basic figure accessory? Awesome, I'll take 12. So all of this was done not with the whole Effin Mon where they just lost money on it, but rather this was released during Clone Wars, which provided a lot of characters with very little tooling and a lot of repaint opportunities. So again, holistically on that P&L, much like Spawn figures without deco or in one solid color could offset the cost of Malbolgia, well, not only were the clones less expensive to make, but this was a high in popularity as far as Star Wars at retail, and there was a large number of figures being released that were already tooled and had no development in the Legends line, if you will. So by pumping out all of this huge number of figures that cost nothing to develop, they would just turn on the machine and go. You just have to pay for production, not development, no tooling. That's what freed up funds to do larger figures like Hermie Oodle and his face only a mother Oodle could love. So while not as big as Effin Mon, he's definitely clearly not a basic figure. But while Effin Mon got sort of dropped in because he won that Fans' Choice, and that actually changed how fan choices are done. We'll get into that in a later video. All right, the last one to talk about is Toy Biz Marvel Legends. Now, Marvel Legends obviously has been at both Toy Biz and at Hasbro, and the Hasbro versions, when they do larger figures that are in scale to what would be a basic 6-inch figure, well, these tend to either be done as Build-A-Figures across a full wave, where in order to have Hulkbuster armor, you have to buy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different figures and cobble together your Hulkbuster, which is actually a lot of fun. If you've never cobbled a Hulkbuster, I highly suggest it. The other way that this figure is released is in a deluxe larger pack, where larger figures can be sold at a larger price point because it's not part of a standard assortment. Not so much when Toy Biz did these large figures. So how did Toy Biz get larger figures in a basic assortment without losing their shirts the way Effin Mon did or passing on the deco? Well, this actually goes back to something Toy Biz had been doing for years, of releasing larger figures in a basic assortment. Now, with the old 5-inch figures, it was done with less deco. With the larger 6-inch figures, where you would really need a Build-A-Figure to build up to that, it was, Toy Biz put out the Blob in their 5-inch line because you could see he had very less deco than Wolverine, and you could amortize the cost over a whole assortment. Not every figure was big, maybe 20%, 10% of them were. Actually, this video, or this shot makes it look like there were more of them than there really were. This is probably all of them. Strong Guy, Blob, Juggernaut. That was actually about it. So yeah, amortized over the whole line. Now, with the 6-inch line, today, obviously, with Hasbro, if you want Blob, you have to buy either a Build-A-Figure, in this case, a one-off larger boxed set figure. The thing with Toy Biz, when they were doing their 6-inch, they didn't pay for their tooling. That's kind of the worst kept secret in the toy industry. And because of this, all of their awesome sculpts and so much fully sculpted figures really created a false sense of perceived value at market of what a customer should get in a 6-inch articulated figure, and, well, in their whole package. Yeah, unfortunately, they went bankrupt, and that's why all of their tail-end lines had so much tooling. I mean, Lord of the Rings, that line, I don't think any figure shared tooling. They were all 100% tooled. And while they were beautiful, they unfortunately, the company went out of business and never paid their tooling bill. And that's how they were able to do larger deluxe size figures in basic assortments because, well, they kind of didn't pay for it. But hey, crazier things have happened. So any other examples you could think of basic figures that are larger than other basic figures you'd love to have kind of an explanation for? I tried to cover all the ones I could think of, but love your thoughts. And as always, any suggestions for video topics are always welcome. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.